Thank you, Doug, for the introduction. Good morning, everybody, and nice to see you all. So since we have a small crowd, I'm going to try to keep this as interactive as possible. So I'm going to present this talk like it's a 4-course meal. So get in your car, you go shopping, and hope you're not using plastic bags if you do that. The initial talk was given to the psych department, grand rounds, but when Doug asked me, I thought, well, you know, the brain, it's the brain that feels the pain. It's not, when you slam your finger with a hammer, it's the brain that's actually feeling the pain, which is why it's the basis for local and general anesthesia. Majority of chronic pain patients also have comorbidities such as depression and anxiety, which would respond to cognitive therapy and, of course, nutrition. And then individual recovery would also benefit from improved cognition. So this is the shopping list we're going to have, the learning objectives. What kind of a war are you? And we can talk about that. Appetizers, the definitions and models of cognition. It's the salad, the mind-body approaches to improve cognition. And the main course, the gut-brain axis and the biome. And then the last, of course, some of the superfoods that we're going to talk about. So let's go shopping for groceries here first. So what kind of a war are you? Are you a carnivore, where you eat all animal-based products? Are you a herbivore, which you eat nothing with legs, occasionally fish? A high-carbon war, where fruits, vegetables from big chain grocery stores, which is shipped from California with a high carbon footprint. Are you a guidivore? You know, some of you guys live out here shopping guidos, so you guys eat there a lot. And are you a locavore? Are you supporting local farmers, markets, CSAs? And then the last and the best would be the homivore, where you grow your own food, where it's homesteading. So what kind of a war are you? So I'm gonna throw this at you. This is a psychiatric shopping bag for psychiatrists. So who knows what that is? Anybody? What syndrome is that? Asperger's. Okay. What's that? What's a corn addiction disorder? Anybody? Come on, use your imagination. It's porn addiction disorder. Okay. What's a maniac depressive? It's a psychiatric diagnosis. Okay. That's a manic depressive. Good answer. What's a personality disorder? That's a personality disorder. What's a suicidal attempt? Suicidal attempt. And then a bipolar disorder, a brie cheese. Okay. And then the last one is my favorite, it's refried beans. Okay, got it, everybody? Okay, good. So this is your shopping bag for a psychiatrist. So we start with the appetizers. Any good meal starts with an appetizer. So what are the definitions of food? So what we buy in a grocery store, nutraceuticals, which the FDA considers as foods, which are almost all herb supplements that you would take. And then the last one is the interesting definition, Ayurvedic definition, which considers what we eat and everything our senses perceive as nourishment for body and soul. So all information nutrition is all information, actually, according to the Ayurvedic concept. And what we feel and hear and smell, it kind of affects us at a physical level, which is really what integrated medicine is in some ways. So what is the definition of cognition? Conscious mental activities, the activities of thinking, understanding, learning, and remembering. But I've added something here, it's called imagination and creativity. And we can teach lab rats to have conscious mental activities and understanding and learning in maze, etc. But we're not going to have a lab rat going to be a Mozart or a Michelangelo someday. So what are some of the tools that we use for measuring cognition? Of course, the mini-mental status exam, the clinical dementia rating, or the CDR, the mini-clog. Too much period of time, we can't go into all the details of that. Clog drawing, what they call the ADAS clog. There is neuropsychological testing, the Boston naming test, constructional praxis. The last one is the MRI, focal cortical thickness, and hippocampus morphology, which is actually measuring morphology of the brain. But the last and the most interesting is functional MRI or PET SPECT scans, which actually show us how the brain is functioning on a regular basis. And the more, this has really revolutionized our concept of cognition, in the sense of what we think is cognition. So we can compare, especially with this concept, we can compare MRIs of people who are normal versus people who have, dementia, schizophrenia, etc., and see where these defects lie in the actual morphology of the brain. So as you're going to see in the next few slides, we're seeing a real paradigm shift in understanding of cognition and consciousness in the physical, metaphysical, and the medical level. So what's the evolution of cognition? So here's Isaac Newton. Mechanistic model. I can calculate motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people. And interestingly enough, Isaac Newton's latest invention was, guess what? The cat door. He had this cat who was meowing outside his door all the time. So he put this little door in his door, in his rooms in Oxford, and what's it Cambridge, I forget. And so he invented the cat door, okay? Besides the whole theory of physics. So he had a mechanistic view. Descartes established a schism between mind and body. So this is mind and body. Mind belonged to the church, the body to science, or the mind to the psychiatrist in modern days, body to the rest of the specialties. And then we have Einstein, who says energy and matter are convertible. His theories gave rise to the atomic age and also opened the door for quantum physics. And I like this quote: the true sign of intelligence is not knowledge, but imagination. He first imagined a non-mathematical model of the theory of relativity, and this was, of course, still alive beyond who he is, and Stephen Hawking. And not only does God play dice, but he sometimes throws them where they cannot be seen. And he came up with a theory of everything marrying the mechanistic world of Newton with the relative world of Einstein, and initially denied the God particle, but now acknowledges the mystery of the universe. And so, according to astrophysics, what holds the universe together is something called dark matter, and as a computer simulation, they've connected all the stars, and you really look at this and use your imagination a little bit. Sorry, you can see that it's really looks like the neural network of the brain. So the macrocosm and the microcosm, whole Chinese system of medicine, inside and outside the same. And then this is interesting. Here's a dancer who's dancing and doing some pretty complex moves. And the fastest neural pathways can conduct about 200 miles per second. But this woman is doing some motions which kind of defy kind of mental thought processes. And so really we're kind of beginning to think that maybe the brain is actually the processor of the action and not the initiator of the action, that the template is imprinted on the quantum field somewhere, and that we are actually accessing that quantum field. So this is again beyond the scope of this talk, but there are mysteries to be solved. He sometimes does throw them where they cannot be seen. So boy, good looking salad, huh? Okay, so let's go on to the next part of it. So this is part of the study that they did with meditation and improvement in gray matter. And the study looked at meditation naive patients before and after 8 weeks of mindfulness-based stress reduction course, which was initiated by Kabat-Zinn. Post-study MRI showed increased gray matter in left hippocampus, which is where memory resides, in the cingulate cortex and the temporal parallel junction and the cerebellum. So basically, there was an increase in the gray matter after 8 weeks of meditation, just 8 weeks of meditation. So the brain is extremely plastic, that's what I'm trying to prove here. And it also, you heard of telomeres. Telomeres are the caps at the end of the chromosome, which every time a cell divides, they get shortened and less and less. Telomerase promotes the growth of these telomeres. So in people who completed the same meditation course, there was significant improvement in telomerase activity. So it actually is reversing some of the aging processes of the brain. Significant improvement, and these are various other studies, in PTSD with the yoga group comparable to the use of psychopharmaceuticals. Improvement in major depressive symptoms in the exercise group comparable to the use of antidepressants. Tai Chi and Qigong significantly reduce the symptoms of anxiety and depression in the elderly. So there are several tools out there that we are really not using, which are very compatible to psychopharmaceuticals, which will actually benefit our patients with very few side effects and improve health. And these are some of the tools that could be applied in chronic pain patients to help them function better. So this is the main course. Getting back to, so these are some of the abbreviations that we want to sort of keep in mind here. MGBA is the microbiota gut-brain axis. We'll talk about that more later. BDNF is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. CNS is, of course, the endocrine system. ENS is the enteric nervous system. IBD is inflammatory bowel disease. IBS is the irritable bowel system. IFN gamma is interferon gamma. Substance P, GABA, butyric acid, and CRP. So these are some of the quick definitions we want to go through. So what are the condiments there? And we're talking about the bacterial condiments that we're going to focus a little bit in this part of the talk. And those are probiotics, which you all know about, antibiotics, which we use a lot of, prebiotics. What are prebiotics? We talk about it. And this is very exciting, called psychobiotics. So prebiotics are actually the food for the probiotics. And all fleshy foods are good for the food. Oligofructosaccharides are good for the food for the probiotics. So you feed the probiotics with the prebiotics, which is why soluble fiber, of course, is also very good for them. And psychobiotics, we're going to discuss in a little bit more detail later on. So let's take each of these core concepts. The food, the gut is the interface between the outer world and the inner world. Food is just not nutrition, it is information. We are what we absorb, not what we eat actually, but what we absorb. The garbage in versus garbage out. Plasticity of the CNS is modified by the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And so anything that increases BDNF, of course, will help the brain. The gut biome plays an integral part. But the biome being the colony of bacteria or probiotics that are found in your gut, so to speak. Integral part in modulating food, pathogens, non-pathogens, and the psychoneuroimmune system. And there's a connection between the gut and the brain by the microbiome gut-brain axis. So we'll take each of these core concepts as we go along. So the gut is the interface between the outer world and the inner world. In functional medicine, everything starts with the gut. You figure out what is going on at the gut level, you can figure out what's going on at the molecular level in the rest of the body. The total villi surface of the villi, which is the lining of the, which is the lining that lines this, is actually an adult human is the size of 2 tennis courts. That's a big surface area that the gut is exposing to the world. There are spaces between these villi, and these spaces controlled by an enzyme called zonulin, Z-O-N-U-L-I-N. And when you have too much zonulin, you actually have something called the leaky gut syndrome. When you eat non-organic meat, which is sprayed by Roundup, you have something called glycophages. Glycophages actually increase the zonulin and therefore allow the gliadin molecule to go through, which is why if you have HLA positive gene structures, you're going to get celiac disease, which is why we're probably seeing an increased incidence of celiac in the general population picking up here. So keep in mind about one more reason to eat organic foods is the use of Roundup and gluten sensitivity. Celiac also causes CNS manifestations, as you know. So it's important that we make the case for eating whole foods as much as possible. So food is not just information. It is, nutrition is information. Obviously the information in a Big Mac right here is very different from the information in all these foods up here. So we can get the information from the foods we eat. And so this is a molecule, it's a little compressed here, of the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It acts on certain neurons of the CNS and peripheral nervous system. It helps to support the survival of the neurons and encourages the growth and differentiation of the neurons. So it is active in the hippocampus, cortex, basal forebrain, etc. It's vital to learning, memory, and plasticity of the brain, as we talked about. More is not necessarily a good thing. In chronic stress and anxiety states, it is high in the amygdala, and so it sort of strengthens the anxiety circuits in some ways. And which is one of the thinkings about PTSD is that the amygdala is strengthened, and so the circuits keep going round and round, which is why the symptoms of PTSD occurs. Also stress decreases the the BDNF in the hippocampus, which is the memory area, so which is why people are stressed out and get very forgetful at times. So these are some of the core, concepts of disease states associated with altered or decreased BDNF levels. So in depression, there is an increase of cortisol, and the feedback loop of cortisol causes the decrease in the BDNF, which causes some of the atrophy of the hippocampus. And in the elderly, we see something called pseudodementia. And pseudodementia is basically the excessive cortisol production dropping the BDNF in the hippocampus. There's a decrease in Alzheimer's disease on post-mortem studies. In epilepsy, there are polymorphisms in gene expression of the BDNF, and which reinforces the excitatory pathways and suppresses the inhibitory pathways, which is why there are seizure disorders. Same thing for OCD patients, same thing for Huntington's disease. There is a problem with schizophrenic patients in the cortical layers, which is involved with working memory. And there is actually an inverse relationship, and this is really interesting, between the body mass index and BDNF. So obesity actually is a risk factor for dementia because it decreases the BDNF production. So what increases the BDNF levels in the brain? Exercise is one of them. It increases the gray matter levels. Turmeric. Turmeric is interesting. Turmeric, India has the lowest incidence of dementia or Alzheimer's disease on the planet. And one of the thinking is that it could be the consumption of turmeric, which is basically from infancy into adulthood. And turmeric binds to amyloid in the brain and also upregulates the BDNF and acts like COX-2. It acts like Cerebrex, the NSAID, Cerebrex. And so it actually may be causing changes in the brain level. Green tea, EGCG, I can never remember that, but ECG, CCG, green tea has also an effect on cognitive anatomy of the brain. Meditation does the same thing. Fish, DHA especially, fish oil. Fish is a brain food in most cultures, and it's critical in pregnancy. Significant decrease in IQ points when maternal diet is low in DHA. So I think encouraging fish intake in pregnancy is very important. There's also this question of mercury we can talk about. Caloric restriction. Caloric restriction is one of the few things that actually can slow down aging, interestingly. It increases the telomerase and hence increases telomere length. And you've heard of the NUN study where intellectual stimulation actually reverses dementia and also actually increases the BDNF production. And then niacin also upregulates the BDNF production. So role for violence in there. So the aliens. The aliens are already on us and inside us. We're actually engulfed by an alien entity. Sounds like a bad science fiction script, right? But here we are. There are 4 microbiomes, or kind of colonies, or some sort of geographical locations of these bacteria on us and inside us. The skin, the mouth, vagina in women, and the gut. So the gut has 100 trillion bacteria. That's a normal bacterial count of a normal human gut. Number of human cells is 10 trillion. There are 10 times as many bacteria in your gut than there are human cells in your entire body. That is kind of amazing. There are 20,000 genes, so we study the human genome, but there are about 2 million bacterial genes. So if you want to study the human genome, you've got to study the 20,000 genes plus the 2 million bacterial genes, which are actually unique to each of us. So this is kind of blows your mind in a sense. Without these bacteria, we would get very sick or very crazy. And one of the interesting things we are seeing now is that babies delivered by C-sections actually have a higher incidence of illnesses and immune problems than babies who are delivered by normal vaginal delivery. And the thinking was that the babies delivered by vaginal delivery pick up the lactobacillus and they colonize the gut with the bacteria that are found in the vagina, whereas the ones that are delivered by C-section colonize with bacteria found on the skin, and therefore are not having the same immune support that they normally would. So this is very interesting. So they're doing a thing now when they do a C-section, they put a swab in the vagina, and as soon as the baby is born, they take the swab out and swab the baby's mouth and skin and everything else with this swab, so that the idea being to colonize it with the right kind of bacteria. So, and then of course, C-sections are a very modern phenomenon when you think about it. So understanding the function of the gut may be key to understanding a lot of different illnesses, including immune system illnesses like inflammatory bowel disease, also the role of rheumatoid arthritis, MS, etc. would be starting to begin just to understand the concept of the biome and how it sort of tweaks us, and upregulation and downregulation of the immune system. So this is a great slide. It's called the bidirectional gut-brain axis. Okay. So the brain has a connection to the gut by the vagus nerve and by the endocrine system, adrenal and the cortisol. So when you're stressed out, which is why your gut activity goes up, you get nervous, you get bowel sound get increased. There's a gut to brain connection also by the vagus nerve, but also by neurotransmitters and metabolites that are actually produced by the microbiota up here. So there's a feedback loop here that goes back and forth, okay? And that's the whole bidirectional gut-brain axis. And there's a lot of work being done right now in research fields about this gut-brain axis. And interestingly, the gut produces as much or even more neurotransmitters than your brain does. And actually it's called the gut-brain. And the next time you have a gut feeling, you're actually feeling those transmitters in there. So trust your gut feeling. Actually, it's more accurate. Just the thought. So some of the data that I'm going to present to you was produced by Professor Phir and Stephen Collins in their works on the effects of inflammation, infection, and antibiotics on the microbiota gut-brain axis. And one of the things we will learn later on is the role of antibiotics in causing psychosis. So this is a busy slide, but just the takeaway point is that enteric infection is accompanied by anxiety-like behavior, which is mediated through the vagal ascending pathways. Chronic infection alters gut function, feelings, patterns of anxiety and depression, and these effects are immune-mediated. In human terms, that means infection, inflammation of the gut has psychiatric comorbidities. And clinical study shows that gastrointestinal lead to malnutrition, stunting, and we'll go about some of the research data here. But it's kind of a busy slide. We'll talk about that later, okay? And this opens up a whole new field of research. You already heard about fecal transplants and chronic C. diff infections. We're seeing in lab studies that when you give the gut biome of an obese rat to a skinny rat, the skinny rat becomes obese. And conversely, the skinny rat to the obese rat becomes thin. So the gut biome may have a lot to do with production of certain ghrelin and other hormones which are responsible for metabolism. So, so when you use antibiotics, you're actually attacking your gut biome. So what happens in depression? There's an increase in the cytokines, the CRP, and major depressive disorders. There is also increased incidence of depression and cognitive dysfunction in chronic illnesses such as RA and COPD. The depression component is actually coming from the inflammation production that is happening. And interferon, which increases the interferon marker, the inflammation markers, actually increases depressive-like behavior in cancer patients. So inflammation has a lot to do with psychiatric disorders, is the takeaway point here. And these can cross the blood-brain barrier. They are pro-inflammatory. They can cause changes in the tryptophan, serotonin metabolism, which is serotonin, as you know, is one of the neurotransmitters. Tryptophan is a precursor of serotonin. And immune modulators such as Enbrel, which are used in the treatment of psoriasis and RA, actually improve the depressive symptoms because, again, they cut down the inflammation. There's a robust connection between IQ and parasite infections. Most powerful predictor of average national IQ is the parasite load in the population. They did a study in Jamaica where they eradicated a very common non-invasive parasite called Trichuris trichiura. It resulted in a significant increase in short and long-term memory. So, we're probably not going to see a lot of parasite infections in this country, but keep that in mind. Early childhood diarrhea, there's a cognitive function, 9 years later was significantly impaired. 20-year study showed that infancy diarrhea caused stunting at 24 months, and every 5 episodes, caused the increased stunting ratio of 1.3. So mice infected with the same parasite showed anxiety-type behavior, decreased expression of the BDNF in the hippocampus, and increase in the amygdala, which again points to the memory and anxiety. So these are animal studies that sort of confirm what I was trying to sort of tell you. And then the abnormal behavior was normalized by administration of budesonide, which is a corticosteroid, which is anti-inflammatory. And the behavior was normalized by administration of the probiotic B. longum. So basically, the probiotic actually normalized the behavior and also normalized the BDNF area. So this could be protective in humans. There are certain foods we avoid that make us anxious because it's a protective sort of mechanism that we have developed. So let's talk about antibiotics. This is very interesting. Penicillins, quinolones, macrolides, sulfonamides are the most common antibiotics that can induce psychosis. Basically, almost all antibiotics that we use today. They develop within 5 days of treatment and stop after withdrawal of treatment. And the cause may be intestinal dysbiosis. You're actually knocking out these psychobiotics, which are actually producing some of the neurotransmitters in your brain, which keep you nice and normal and happy, and all of a sudden they're not there. It may be the precursor of irritable bowel syndrome, the intestinal dysbiosis. This is an interesting term, dysbiosis. Does anybody know what that term means, dysbiosis? It's actually basically you're knocking out all the good bacteria in the gut. After a course of antibiotics, that would happen. You're going to have a lot of bloating, you have something called antibiotic-associated diarrhea, and in worst case scenario would be a C. diff colitis or C. diff diarrhea. So that's really the sort of progression, dysbiosis to antibiotic-associated diarrhea, to then progressing to the C. diff diarrhea. Overgrowth of the bacteria that convert tryptophan to serotonin, that is the same thing that's happening in the gut, which causes increased gut motility, which we see in irritable bowel syndrome. And then the Phir and vagal pathways from the CNS down to the gut by the vagus nerve. So that's the interesting loop there, CNS down to the gut, gut back up to the CNS through the reduction of bacteria that produce serotonin. So the most interesting study was Bifidobacterium bifidum, which is a Phillips colon health you find in a commercial preparation, was more effective than placebo, but not as effective as yogurt in reducing the symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome. So one of the things I tell my patients is to get on yogurt or get on or if they don't like yogurt, to go on this colon health, which is a Bifidobacterium, which can help their IBS symptoms pretty dramatically, actually. So let's talk about the dessert here. I'm going to take a little break and some water here. So we're actually going to go into the superfoods that we sort of recommend. So these are some of the must-eat foods. The first food that I would recommend is fermented foods. Okay, most of us don't eat enough fermented foods in our diet, and I strongly recommend that it become part of your diet. It should be a food group in itself, I feel. And there are several ways to get it. The most common, of course, is yogurt and kefir. But there's sauerkraut, there's kimchi, there's fermented soy products. So different cultures have different ways to eat fermented foods. But in our culture, mostly it's the kefir. And you can see that kefir has almost 12 different strains of probiotics. You can get the grains and make it yourself. Very simple way to make it: just throw it in milk, let it sit overnight, strain out the stuff, and then redo the whole process every day. You can buy the grains online, actually, on Amazon. This is what I use. It's called Lifeway. It tastes pretty good, actually. It's a liquid form, so to speak, but it adds a lot of probiotics on a regular basis. And I tell people, just eat about 4 ounces every day if you can. Drink about 4 ounces of this stuff every day to make sure that your bacteria kind of stay nice and healthy. But there are other forms of fermented foods that, depending on the culture, for example. So these are some of the conditions that they help. They help, and you can see on the slide that some of them are not studied in infectious diarrhea, but in traveler's diarrhea, radiation-induced diarrhea, antibiotic-associated diarrhea, C. diff, Helicobacter, not studied, Crohn's disease, not studied, ulcerative colitis, not studied, and irritable bowel syndrome, it's really not studied, but bifidobacterium is what they recommend. But in the end, I mean, it's a very safe thing to add to your patient's regimen. I mean, it can't really hurt them to do it. Right? I tell people that try to use more food sources of fermented products rather than the capsules itself that you can buy at a pharmacy or at some other nutrition store, because you don't know what the bacteria are there, how long have they been sitting there. It sounds pretty interesting that they have 19 billion bacterial count, but that doesn't really make any difference. It's better to eat a food source, and I think the delivery of the food source is much more better, and I think the body utilizes it better. So stick with the food source of probiotics if you can. So we talked about curcumin, turmeric. Turmeric is a member of the ginger family, and ginger is also a very powerful anti-inflammatory, but that's a talk for another day. There's a lot of RCT studies in cancer prevention and treatment, and in prevention of Alzheimer's disease. It activates the NRF2 pathways and therefore increases glutathione. Glutathione is a very powerful CNS antioxidant. So anything that increases glutathione actually increases the brain's kind of activity and efficiency, so to speak. There are really no side effects. You can take up to 10 grams a day. The Ayurvedic way of eating it is to have a warm glass of milk, a teaspoon of honey, and a teaspoon of turmeric, and mix it up and break it down. That's one way to get the turmeric in. It binds to iron, so it can cause iron deficiency. It binds to amyloids, we talked about earlier, so it slows down the progression of Alzheimer's. And it's also COX-2 inhibitors. It also increases the BDNF, so we already covered that a little bit about curcumin. So curcumin is a very powerful anti-inflammatory, like this, the COX-2 effect. And so I have little old ladies who are doing great with arthritis on turmeric and fish oil combination, which are both anti-inflammatory, working in different pathways. And they do really well with it. It's very safe. And you can buy turmeric in capsules, now it doesn't really matter. I recommend up to 3 grams a day normally, but you can go even higher if you have to. Fatty fish and shellfish, good source of omega-3s and vitamin D. If you can eat 16 ounces of fatty fish, preferably wild caught, once a week, you're probably getting enough omega-3s, enough vitamin D for your daily needs for the entire week, actually. But most of us don't. Omega-3s, 20% of your brain is made up of omega-3 fatty acids, essential fatty acids. It's like the grease for the neurons. It helps the neurotransmitters work very well. A lot of studies again in omega-3 replacement in anxiety and depression. And in any patient who comes to me with depression, they automatically get started on omega-3s. I think that's kind of like a given. If you're not eating enough fish in your diet, supplementation. Be careful about supplementation. There are lots of brands out there. They're not properly processed, so do the research for that. Here's a little rule of thumb. If you open a bottle of fish oil and it smells fishy, it's very poorly processed. Don't use it. Higher DHM levels associated with better performance on tests of nonverbal reasoning, mental flexibility, working memory, and vocabulary. And so it's something that we need to really make a part of the diet. You all know by now that omega-3 to omega-6 ratio, like 30 years ago, was 1:4 or 1:5. Now it's about 1:30. So there's a lot of omega-6 which are sort of pro-inflammatory in the diet. So the more we can take, more omega-3s we can replace, the better it is for us. The mercury content is of course a concern. There's something called the Monterey Bay Aquarium, which is a website you could use. And Monterey Bay Aquarium actually does the research on which fish is safe, which fish isn't, which is over-harvested, etc. Chocolate, boy, look at all the chocolate. So, chocolate is a really powerful antioxidant. I'll tell you a little bit about what that means. But there's something called the Benton Visual Retention Test, the BVRT. BVRT was developed in 1946. It shows, basically, they show an image for about 5 seconds and then they ask the patient to reproduce that image. And the image, of course, the retention is slower in disease states like Parkinson's, very early dementia, etc. And it's a test that's used by psychologists quite a bit, actually. So what they did was they actually did a functional MRI of the brain in the dentate gyres to see what the reaction time would be with the BBRT. Okay, and to see how fast the dentate gyres respond. So as the BBRT actually gets worse with age. Okay, the timing of the time of the day. So there's an increase of 220 milliseconds for every decade of life lived. So every 10 years you live, you increase your BBRT or the retention time by 220 milliseconds. And when they put the people on chocolate at the end of 12 weeks in the high cocoflavanol group, they found that they had a decrease in the BBRT time, which was equivalent to 30 years of aging. That's 3 decades of aging. What that means in real terms, I'm not completely sure, but heck, it's chocolate, so why not? The bitter, the better. The more darker the chocolate, the more bitter it is, the better it is. Good rule of thumb is you can have any color of chocolate you want as long as it's over 70%. That's Henry Ford, when he said that. Any color of car you want as long as it's black. So 70%. And make sure that it's dark chocolate. And one of the things I tell about chocolate, coffee, and tea, make sure you have organic chocolate, organic coffee, and organic tea. It's worth the money. These are the 3 crops that are extremely heavily sprayed. And so you're going to get a very high pesticide load when you use those kind of foods, which are not organic. So what does that mean in real life terms? So three pieces of like a baker's chocolate is about 700 milligrams of cocoa flavonoids. That was the study. And then, so keep in mind that it should be, not Hershey or a Hershey bar. It should be darker chocolate, and a small amount goes a long way. It doesn't have to be a lot. 3 small pieces. And I would recommend you try to make that as a part of your diet. And most patients say, "Oh, yeah, sure, chocolate sounds good to me." So I've never had a prop patient say, "I don't want to use it." So vitamin D. Vitamin D is not a vitamin, actually. It is a hormone by definition. It's something your body makes. You need sunlight to make it, but it still is a hormone by definition. It has a lot of anti-inflammatory and antidepressant effects. It helps the immune system. There are actually immune receptors. There are vitamin D receptors in the immune system which get activated by vitamin D. So getting enough vitamin D is pretty critical. I have some controversy with my colleagues about how much. I recommend 5,000 units of vitamin D every day as a routine. So I take myself, winter, summer, fall. Check the levels periodically. There are very few individuals who you have to be careful about, like sarcoidosis, people like that who have problems with toxicity. But we don't really know what the highest level of vitamin D is. Living in a tropical area, we're making a lot more than the top normal level. So foods high in vitamin D are, of course, fatty fish. Mushrooms are actually high in vitamin D. And foods low in vitamin D. So I drink milk. You don't have to drink like 4 gallons of milk to get your vitamin D intake. So it's best to get sunlight. If you don't have sunlight, supplement. And I'm not fussy about where you get your vitamin D from. It's just get 5,000 units if you take it regularly, especially in this diet and the Berkshires. Broccoli effect. Broccoli and the cruciferous type vegetables like cauliflower, etc., they're high in something called sulforaphanes. Sulforaphanes actually activate the NRF2 pathway, which again increases the glutathione, which is a powerful antioxidant in the brain, and therefore you have the brain's toxic. Keep in mind the brain, as you're sitting here, is using almost 1/3 of your energy requirements. It's an extremely metabolically active product, and it sort of detoxifies at night when you're sleeping, actually. So sleep is very important, and we can talk about that at the top. But anything that helps the antioxidant function, which is glutathione, which is broccoli, etc., will help, and it also protects against carcinogen exposure. Blueberries. It's similar to resveratrol, which is found in red wine. It's something called pterostilbene. There are some really interesting research data coming out on blueberries and prevention of cancer, etc. It's also activator of the NRF2 pathway, which we talked about earlier, and also for glutathione production. And that's the last slide. They say if life gives you dandelion, make a salad. That's the end of the talk, and this is the part one of the talk. There's a part two that I'm working on to present this year, sometime on some of the superfoods, and also covering some of the herbs and supplements that I used for cognitive function. And so that's that. So I'm going to open it up to any questions that you may have about this topic. Yeah.
I wanted to make a comment that vitamin D that is added to milk or egg, it's usually T2 ergopalciferol, which doesn't really absorb very well, and T3 the polypalciferol now we know is much more effective.
Right.
So I'm so grateful you prescribed T3 5,000 rather than once a week 50,000 of T2, which probably doesn't do much.
Yep.
A lot of people still prescribe weekly 50,000 tablets that doesn't get absorbed.
Yeah.
So that's unfortunate.
So D3 is the active form, and D2 is its sort of conversion form. Are you pharmacy? Psychiatry.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, D2, vitamin D is D3 form. Yep, that's right.
And I have a question: how do you approach this with your anxiety depression patients? Because oftentimes they're looking for something like for a quick fix, quick relief, and not for the diet recommendation. Like, how do you approach it in your quick primary care appointment?
I think every patient should get a nutrition consult before they walk into the door. Is my feeling, because food, really is so critical in our treatment protocols. So I will, of course, talk to them about eating healthy, but that is kind of a really uphill battle because it's culture, that drives that. You can't really change people's habits of years and years. But I will recommend them to take fish oil, vitamin D, a good multivitamin, especially the B vitamins, which are all important for the production of all the neurotransmitters, actually. So it's good to do that. I think it's a starting point. The ideal thing would be to eat a perfect diet, and that's kind of difficult in our society. But that would be sort of a good sort of cocktail I would start with on almost every patient with depression and anxiety. That's my thinking about it. So, yes, Tony.
I take a probiotic every day, having had C. difficile 6 years ago. I was a guest of ICU, and I still take a PPI 5% on the risk. Should I be taking Phir, preferential probiotics?
So I tell patients that, especially if you're dealing with something like C. diff or antibiotic-associated diarrhea, and there is a role for taking oral probiotics in capsule form in those situations. And I tell people, open up a capsule and mix it up with yogurt or kefir or whatever you're using, because I think it improves the delivery of the probiotic bacteria, because it has to get to the gut level. At the stomach level, gastric acids are usually knocking it out. Basically, it is destroying all the bacteria. And that's another thing. If you're on antibiotic therapy, I tell people take the probiotics at least a couple of hours after you take the antibiotic. Don't take it together. Obviously, that doesn't make sense. But at least take the probiotics about a week to 2 weeks after you stop taking the antibiotics. Don't stop taking the probiotics, because your gut has to sort of recolonize for a while. So it's important to sort of do that. But on a day-to-day basis, I think things like kefir and stuff like that, they actually deliver a lot of good bacteria in a very healthy sort of proliferative form to where it should be delivered. And I think it's a much more natural way to get that probiotics where they need to go.
I can remember many years ago when I was a medical student, when a patient was put on tetracycline, which was about the only antibiotic going there. The sister would always give those patients yogurt with their meals.
Yeah.
It was not ordered, it was just a standard
order.
Even there.
Yeah. I had a running argument with the ID people in the Pennsylvania hospital where I work. I said, why aren't we giving these people yogurt on a consistent basis when we put them on antibiotics? Why are we waiting till they get a C. diff infection, then we start thinking about putting them on yogurt? It doesn't make any sense. So I think this is important that we can get a little more proactive, even in a hospital setting. I'm not in the hospital anymore, but it'd be nice to see if we could add that as a part of their food regimen to sort of prevent the whole disaster of C. diff that we see. Yeah. Yes.
can you please repeat about the pseudo-dementia? Because we learned that this is a symptom of depression when people get pseudo-demented. And can you just repeat what you said about it? The gut-brain connection and so on?
Yeah, so one of the things that what happens in depression, especially in the elderly, is the BDNF, the increased cortisol production that happens with chronic stress decreases the BDNF in the hippocampus.
So lowering the cortisol level.
Yeah, so it decreases the BDNF, and that is basically the pathway of most depression or major depressive disorder. High cortisol levels, that is, people who are stressed out for long periods of time, decreases BDNF because causes some of the symptoms of depression. So the hippocampus doesn't remember very well, forget, memory gets decreased, and that pseudo-dementia comes through where they say, I forgot, but they're really actually depressed. You treat the depression and they get better. So, dementia decreases. So since we have a little bit of time, why don't you tell us where you guys are from?
Dr. Medical.
Say
Yes.
yeah, good.
From Suburban Medical.
So, okay. You,
Andrew.
the guy,
Okay.
yeah. And
And I'm just the coordinator in Phir Medical and ABBREVIATIONS.
who's that?
Phir Medical, ABBREVIATION, and ABBREVIATIONS.
Okay, you're,
Virtual medical group.
okay. NEWTONIAN, no? You're, yeah, that person there.
Oh, we pink footed.
Okay. You can see it there?
Yep.
Okay, so thank you very much, and Phir Milenge means we'll meet again. That's what it means in Hindi. So we'll meet again.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.